Hello and welcome back to our next session. I'm going to try to get out of the way as quickly as possible so I don't take up any time. Just to say thank you for joining us again. Do jump straight into the chat. Once again, let us know what you're looking for from this session. If you weren't in our first session, let us know where you're joining from so we know roughly where people are in the world. Thank you to Jason for giving his time today to come into share his insights with all of us. And thank you to our event sponsors, Evolve L&D, L&D Free Spirits, and the Little Man Project. Links to all can be found in the description. With that, let me get out of the way. Jason, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Tom. And hopefully you guys enjoy the talk. So today, I think what I'm going to be talking about are beauty therapists, or to use the correct term, somatologists. Now, if you see the title, you would be forgiven for wondering what any of that has to do with hamster wheels, digital twins, and Playdoh. But we'll get there. But first, this talk is going to be about immersive technology and education. So let me set the stage. We've all probably read countless articles and listened to countless talks on the impact of future and emerging technology on our jobs, our businesses, and our daily lives. And I'm not going to bore you with another talk about the future of work because it's just a trend, right? It's just another trend. There have been many before it, and we're going to see many more trends in the future. What's important for me is the mindset that we apply to these changes. So you can see them as detrimental to our businesses and jobs, causing frustration, disruption, and messing with our well-laid plans for our careers and our futures. Or you can see these changes for what they are, an opportunity, especially if we embrace them and take advantage of the benefits that come with them. Now, I've spent the last 4 years speaking to over 200 learning and development professionals through podcasts we run, an annual L&D industry report, and through countless projects and companies I've been involved in. And through all of these discussions, the key thread I've observed is that the learning and development industry is in flux. Businesses are starting to understand, finally, that learning and development is one of the most strategic enablers of the business. The reason being that despite technology being at the forefront of a lot of business strategy, success almost always depends on the effectiveness of the people in the organization. We're starting to come out of a century-long of historical neglect, where businesses treated people as resources, cogs in a machine, and they could get away with this. And sadly, many still believe they can, mainly due to the long-term damage caused by this nonsense. But I absolutely believe and have seen firsthand that truly successful businesses are those that understand it's about the people and not resources. So somewhere along the way, I feel learning and development lost track, right? We leverage technology to make learning more scalable, more measurable, but we see lower and lower rates of engagement with learning and increased rates of anxiety when it comes to learning new skills. Now, this is despite businesses spending more each year on learning and development, and it seems like we're on this hamster wheel, where departments are putting in more complex learner management systems with more visibility, more measurements, introducing more videos, animation, interactive e-learning content. And at the end of the day, it seems like it's just trying to do more of the same and hoping for a better outcome. The traditional way of learning, and even some of the more contemporary ways we learn, such as e-learning, aren't having the desired impact. And that's really sad, because I honestly believe that we all love to learn and discover new things. So can we solve this? And I think we can. So I think the answer lies back in our childhood. When we learned how to make a house and families out of Playdoh, draw pictures of our parents or our favorite superhero, bake a cake, or learn to ride a bike. Now, hopefully this inspired you to think about a fond moment from your childhood where you learned something new. It was exciting. And if you did, answer this question in your head. How successful were you the first time you tried? Probably not that successful, right? But that's okay, because we did it, we continued to try, and we got better up until the point where we mastered it. There's an incredible power in learning this way. And much like all of you, my story revolves around me learning to ride a bike as a kid. No different. I started with the training wheels. The training wheels came off. My parents held the back of my bike, ran along with me. And then suddenly, in my case, I heard my father's voice, but it was way behind me. And I realized at that moment that I was riding a bike. Unlike most of you, I ended up in a rose bush, but that didn't stop me. Right? I carried on riding and learning and mastering until eventually I topped out. When I managed to ramp my BMX over my two best friends, no one was harmed in the incident. And just as well, their parents probably have never found out. But the real point of the story is that, I moved on with my life and I stopped being interested in riding bikes. But fast forward 20 odd years. And recently I've been, I suppose, kind of absorbed like the Borg into the mountain biking community. Never thought I would, but somehow I've been kind of coerced into riding a mountain bike. Now, the interesting thing for me was that I didn't have to learn to ride a bike again. I could literally pick the bike up and just start riding. And obviously there were some nuances to mountain biking, which I had to learn, but the core skills I'd learned 20 years before was still front and center in my mind. And this, I think, is what I like to see as the power of experiential learning. Now, think about how different this is from the way that employees learn at work today, right? You go on training to learn a new skill. You come back and apply that skill. It's that way because businesses are driven by results and they cannot afford for employees to make mistakes at the expense of customers and profits. So instead, we create these unrealistic scenarios where people have to pretend that they have mastered something when in fact they haven't. Now, despite all of that, I personally believe and have seen with my own eyes that trial and error is still the most effective way we learn at work. Colleagues help other colleagues. People make mistakes and learn from them. The problem is that this takes time, often too much time, and it comes at a cost. It's not surprising that this approach often leaves employees feeling anxious, breaking down their confidence, and business leaders feeling frustrated that things aren't happening quickly enough. And of course, who's sitting right in the middle of all of this? Yep. So historically, it's been really difficult to offer experiential learning because it's unrealistic. It doesn't scale well. It's expensive. It requires one-on-one engagement with teachers and mentors, setting up expensive environments. And, the challenge with that is it just doesn't work, right? But what if we could give every person the ability to learn like they did as a child? If we could give them that one-to-one access to a teacher or mentor, we could let them learn without fear of making a mistake or judgment. If we could put them in real-world environments or in front of real-world customers. And finally, if they could learn by trial and error and do it as many times as they needed to achieve that mastery. Now, 3 years ago, I realized that we were on this journey with VR to having a technology that could solve that problem, but it wasn't there yet. Even so, I designed a few VR solutions for customers that actually delivered an incredible return on investment. But the real epiphany came a little over a year ago. We saw the mainstream availability of generative AI. Now, combined with VR, I believe we finally have a technology that can allow us to offer experiential learning affordably at scale. And this brings us back to the somatologists. So, Isaac Carstens is an academy in South Africa. They train over 300 to 400 students a year. They're very successful. Their students go on to work in some of the most prestigious spas and resorts around the world. But they were on a journey looking to see how they could scale their business. They already had 2 bricks and mortar sites, and they started off by going to their potential downstream employers, right? So as a learning organization, you want to make sure that if you're going to take on more students, they're going to be jobs for these students. The problem was that when they went and had these conversations with these prospective employers and said, we're going to be bringing on more students, are you going to be able to hire them? The answer was no. Right? And it caught them a little bit off guard and by surprise. And they said, well, why is that? And the 2 biggest pushbacks that they got from these prospective employers was, well, firstly, our business is about more than just treatments. It's about selling products. And every time we get these graduates coming in, they believe that they've been trained to do treatments, and they've not been trained to do products. And this wasn't actually why they got into this career in the first place. They wanted to work with people and do therapies. And unfortunately, we can't allow that because the lifeblood of our business is selling products. So that was the first one. The second issue that they had was that often the younger graduates coming into their business wouldn't be able to create a rapport with their more mature clientele. So you can imagine that 20-year-olds, kind of sitting opposite a 40-year-old, 45-year-old woman who's having skin-related issues due to menopause. They don't have the skills to be able to navigate that conversation and create a rapport. And what these employers were realizing is that they were losing a lot of repeat business through this. So those aside, what Isaac Carson's had tried to do to solve that problem is they built salons into their campuses. But interestingly, they found exactly the same problems happening in these salons that they were running. And an interesting additional kind of challenge emerged is that they were saying that the fact that the students are being given a lot of theoretical knowledge and then asked to go down to the salon and speak to that, work with their first customer, even though they had sessions where they had trained them how to do this, they found quite a number of the students would actually exhibit signs of anxiety and fear. The worst of which was some students who would actually turn around and just have a breakdown and not be able to go and do what they were asked to do, to go and speak to their client, go and give them a treatment. They would just be in tears. So they described, this sliding door that they had in their salon, and that when the sliding door opened, it became this kind of metaphor for the students of this harrowing fear of doing their first real treatment. And finally, of course, this was all started because they wanted to understand, how do we expand our business and how do we move beyond this? And obviously, they didn't want to do that by expanding with bricks and mortar. They wanted to see how they could do that digitally. So the first thing we did is we took a bespoke approach. Right? So we said, what are the things that are going to help solve this problem for them? And we came up with these 4 pillars. There's critical thinking, empathy, sales skills, and subject matter expertise. So, critical thinking is can I read for clues in the conversation? Can I observe and see things about my kind of customer that I wouldn't normally have seen? Empathy is about, how do I create a rapport with that customer? How do I look for nonverbal cues? And then sales skills. We all know that there's a big part of sales which is about subject matter expertise, knowing your product, but there's also a big part of sales which is about timing and knowing when to push and when to hold back. And finally, the subject matter expertise part was because you've got to obviously fit a product to a need. You've got to use the right language. You've got to use the appropriate language, and you've got to remember to do things that might seem pretty obvious, but like greet the client by their name. Sounds simple, but it's amazing how many times we forget to do that. So with that, the next thing we did is we looked at building real world experiences for the students. So again, coming back to that experiential learning, right? The best way we learn is by learning in a real world environment without the fear of failure and judgment. So what we create is we created scenarios that mirror real world situations that these students will find themselves in at the salon downstairs when they go into the working world. And we came up with these 3 initially. And the interesting part about all of them is that, for Miss Randall, the idea there was, she's stressed, she's planning a wedding, she's coming for a treatment. But if you pay attention and think critically, you'll find out that she's actually a runner, that she's injured herself running. It's probably related to the stress of planning a wedding, but there's an opportunity there then to give her a sample of a product to book her in for more sessions, and there's the selling coming in, but also the critical thinking. For Mr. Toy, it was an interesting challenge for us because the students had this mental block where they thought, if people aren't wealthy and affluent, I shouldn't be selling to them. It's not right. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because you need to help people understand that actually what they're doing is they're providing value for their customers. They're not extracting money. I think we've kind of created this bizarre definition of what selling is, these kind of snake oil salesmen. It's about delivering value, and it's teaching the students how to do that. And finally, Mr. Williams is the most challenging one of all. And that's also what we build in. We build in this kind of sliding scale of difficulty. We don't believe in throwing someone in the deep end and just giving them a really, really tough thing to start with. We give them something easy. But Mr. Williams is the typical kind of angry, frustrated, short-tempered customer you get. Couldn't find parking. Of course, it's your fault because you couldn't find parking. He's late. He's got another meeting after this. He's now coming in angry because he's worried he's going to get less time for his treatment. And you've got to be able to talk him down off the ledge and give him a good experience. So I talked at the beginning about the combination of VR and AI. And this is one of the, we use AI extensively throughout our whole journey. We use it to create our avatars. We use it to create the animations. We use it to use text to speech for our avatars' voices. We even have AI models which can take speech to text. But what we used AI exclusively for here was, in this example, is to mirror a natural conversation. Now, I think a lot of times where people do stuff like this, it's a glorified multiple choice assessment that they shroud with avatars and actions and interactions, but it's a linear journey from point A to point B, asking you a series of questions, you giving a series of answers. We use something called a behavior tree that allowed us to simulate real-world conversations. You can follow different paths down a conversation. You can end conversations abruptly. You can have small talk. Not everything you talk about always has to be related to the kind of challenge at hand. But we could also observe people's behaviors with this model as well. And more importantly, it's obviously very helpful to know, has someone said the right thing, and have they chosen the right language. But there's a lot about conversations that also revolve around what's not said and missed opportunities for saying things at certain times, especially in a sales conversation. And we can understand and identify all of those. So what this ended up being is, at Sozo, we're big fans of this concept of mastery. And I know it's got a little bit of a kind of challenge to it, as some people saying in this day and age, we don't have time for people to kind of master their jobs. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I think there's degrees of mastery. And when I think about all the people that I've observed who've gone away, learned skills, come into the job and tried to implement them in the job, they've generally had a really hard time of it because they haven't been given that little bit of an opportunity to practice those skills in the same environment they're going to be using them on a day-to-day basis. So by doing this mastery journey, what we're effectively saying is that we're giving people input and information along the way in their journey to help them understand where they should be, kind of how they should be answering things, what they should be focusing on. In the example that you're seeing here, what you can kind of start to see is that if you look at the graph, is the person who's done this hasn't applied enough critical thinking. And as a result, what you've noticed there is that they've missed opportunities on sales skills. But the graph is the opposite way around on empathy. So what this person has been doing is has been focusing too much on building a rapport, on empathy, and missing the clues that allow that person to navigate towards a sale. On the right-hand side, you're seeing every single interaction as well as every single missed interaction as feedback. So we can give that level of detail and nuanced feedback to the learner on the journey. And this, of course, is available in like real time in front of them on the screen. So putting this whole solution together, there's just one more thing I wanted to talk about, is coming all the way back to that fear of that sliding door. One amazing thing about VR is when we're in these virtual worlds, it's been proven that our brains can't tell the difference between the virtual world and the real world. And in this scenario, what we did is we created an exact digital twin of their treatment room and put these customers with them in these treatment rooms. So the kind of philosophy behind that is, by the time they saw their first real patient through this salon, it wouldn't actually have been the first time they had seen a patient. They've already been with someone who looks and your brain feels like is a real person in an environment that they're comfortable with. And hopefully that solves the problem. And I'll be talking to that a little bit as we come back to it. But Before I go there, there's always one thing that happens whenever I give a presentation about VR, is someone says, but why VR though? Right? Why couldn't we just do this using a simple computer-based interactive solution that runs on a desktop or PC? And you could. There's nothing to stop you. I mean, it's not going to really change the cost other than the cost of the headset. But there are a number of reasons, I believe, why VR makes a big difference. So the first one is the one that I've already alluded to, is that our brains can't tell the difference between the virtual world and the real world. And when we're in VR, our empathy is heightened, which means that our quality of learning improves. And because you have this deepened empathy, your brain feels real, the stakes are higher. It feels less like one of those engineered role-playing scenarios and more of a real play scenario because you feel like you're in a real scenario. Secondly, it solves the confidence problem, which in my opinion is the biggest barrier to learning at the moment. Through having a safe environment to learn in that feels real, it allows us to practice actual scenarios that we would face on our day-to-day jobs as often as we need to, without that sense of feeling that we're going to be judged if we get something wrong. And this is how we build confidence. Like, confidence takes time to build. It takes a second to break it down. And that's not something that's easy to do without VR. Now, because we're learning by doing than using the actions we would in the real world, we're also learning faster. You're given contextual information in a real world scenario and you put it into practice as you would in that real life situation. You don't need to learn theoretical knowledge, which you still then end up having to figure out, okay, how do I apply this in my actual day-to-day job? And that's often where the kind of lack of confidence comes in. VR helps you create emotional connection to the content. And this one's a bit harder to explain, but the nature of the experience feeling real in your brain and the increased empathy that learners experience in the VR headset often results in higher levels of knowledge retention and better outcomes across a number of areas, including, most importantly, customer experience. Why? Because you have an engaged employee, right? They feel more confident. And finally, there's this hot topic of diversity and accessibility. And where VR really shines is that people in VR can literally step into the shoes of anybody else experiencing workplace scenarios such as gender, race, or disability, and giving people valuable first-hand experience of what it's like in those situations. And because VR is as close as you will ever get to a technology that mirrors the real world as of today, accessibility can be addressed in a number of ways, from providing adjustable settings for audio and visual to haptic feedback and really highly customizable controls and interfaces. So we're a year down the line with ISO Carstens, and the great news is that they're still using the tools every day with learners. The results have continued to be overwhelmingly positive. Learners feel that they've got the skills that they need to deal with different guests. The head of the salon has confirmed that the students are more confident when they enter the salon. The sales are higher year on year. And most importantly, the learners feel better equipped to enter the job market. Now, the important thing is that all of this has been done for 300 learners without adding a single new member of staff in 2 disparate locations with only 4 headsets. Think about that for a second. All right, so I'd like to leave you today with 3 things that you can do if you want to incorporate VR into your training. The first one applies to any training, but it's really going to be critical if VR is your first training, if this is your first VR initiative. And especially given that there will be an upfront cost and business doesn't like the fact they've got to buy more hardware. So you really need to lean into the fact that you can measure, provide business value, bring a return on investment. So I would start slow and find an intervention that you can physically measure. There's too many kind of amorphous subjective things in the business. I would start somewhere with hard metrics. And remember that, like anything, VR is not a silver bullet. Right? It's got a specific place in the learning journey. So I would focus on the area where you need to improve the application of learning. That part often where you kind of come into the business and you've just learned something and now you've got to apply it in your daily lives. That's where I think VR shines. The second one is I'd make the learning experience active. Now, what I mean by this is too often I see people saying, yep, we've done a VR experience. And when I probe what they've done, it's a 360 video. And what ends up happening is that the learner becomes a passive observer in the learning experience. And all that happens is that they're prompted from time to time to make a decision or discuss an observation. And it's tempting to do this because it's often cheaper, easier to implement, but this isn't experiential learning. You're not going to build confidence, and you're probably going to end up with the same issues that you've got with your current e-learning training. And personally, I think that this is the main reason today why VR never survives past the first project in most organizations. And finally, take into account that you'll need a physical headset and that they'll need to be managed. There'll need to be some kind of process around this. Now, your IT department won't be your best friend. They don't like new technology coming in that they can't control or manage. One solution might be to get them a headset that they can play with and distract them while you actually do the project. But a lot of people, a lot of customers worry about this, and it's actually not rocket science. But I see customers often leaving this to the last minute. And if you go back to the Isaac Carson's, 300 students with 4 headsets across 2 geographical locations over the course of a year, if you just plan correctly, it can be done. So finally, what I'd like to leave you with is a great saying from Albert, who happens to also be on my wall behind me, is learning is an experience. So one thing that I love about creating learning experiences is the fun part. Is learning doesn't have to be boring. It can be engaging. It can be fun. So I would encourage you guys, go out there and make some epic, fun, experiential learning experiences for your employees, your customers, everybody. Thank you very much.
Superb. Thank you so much for that, Jason. Really interesting stuff and pretty much bang on time, which was marvelous. We were talking a lot about that before. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who has joined us across all the platforms that we are streaming to. Really appreciate it. If you've got any questions, anything you want to know, now is the time to put it in the comments. And if not, then leave us in the chat, rather. Leave it in the comments if you don't get it to us live, and I'll try and facilitate some long-term question and answer, or provide some insight where possible in the comments. You'll find links on where you can find Jason and Sozo Labs in the description of this video. Thank you so much for spending half an hour of your time with us today, and we'll see you in the next one. Jason, thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks, Tom.